money. You're broke. You're a renter. You don't buy a house when you're broke.
All right, so there's a problem in America today. Everyone says buying a home is the smartest financial investment you can make, but what if it's actually a trap?
I bought a house when I was 26 and fell immediately into poverty.
Is buying a home actually the American dream, or is it just an illusion we've been sold to by banks and the financial system? For most of our lives, success in America has been dictated by the house you own, the car you drive, and the place you work. But these are also the same things that can completely crush you financially and lead you into a hole that feels almost impossible to get out of. You see, all of the financial gurus on the internet would like you to think that renting is the dumbest thing you can do in your 20s. You're just throwing money away, you could be building equity instead, or the assumption that real estate values always go up. And they argue that buying a home is the smartest financial investment you can make. But when you look at the real numbers behind it all, is that actually true? Let's break it down. For this example, we're going to look at this $500,000 home. We'll compare buying it versus renting it and include all of the hidden costs you don't think of. If you were to purchase this home for $500,000 with 20% down, you'll be spending about $115,000 upfront for the down payment and closing costs. With that out of the way, you're now looking at a $2,489 mortgage payment every month. But it doesn't stop there. You'll also need to factor in property tax, homeowner's insurance, and maintenance, which would add an additional $1,229 per month. So all in, you're going to spend $3,718 per month to own this home. Now, if you want to rent that same home, you're looking at a monthly rent of $2,500 and maybe about $20 a month in renter's insurance. So all in, you're saving about $1,200 per month just by renting. But this is where every financial guru wants to climb out of the woodwork and shout about equity. And I totally get it. But the problem is, to build equity in a home, you need to own it for an extended period of time, because that mortgage payment you're making every month is mostly just interest in the beginning. Under our current example, about 85% of the $2,489 is going toward interest, and only $364 is applied to your $400,000 mortgage. So you're spending an extra $1,200 a month to earn $400 a month in equity. Not exactly a one-for-one exchange like we're told online. That said, rent does increase every year and home prices also typically increase every year. So it's safe to assume that when you go to sell that home, you'll end up making more. But it all depends on how long you hold the house for. And with the average first-time home buyer only holding their home for 2 to 5 years, the investment in a home looks even worse. Going back to our example, we're going to play this out like we had lived in the home for 5 years, then decided to move. Every year, the home value went up by 3.5% and the rent increased by 3%. Both pretty standard rates today. After 5 years, the home is worth $593,845. But after 5 years, you've only actually paid down about $24,000 of your mortgage. So when you go to sell that house, assuming you can actually sell it for $593,000, you'll walk away with $182,264 after closing costs. But if you had been renting that whole time and placed the $100,000 you didn't spend on a down payment into the market, and you threw in the additional savings of $1,200 each month compared to a mortgage, assuming a 5% annual return, you'd be looking at an investment portfolio worth around $207,000. To clarify, these are rough estimates, so real world numbers may differ, but we're just trying to get a general idea of the impacts here. So roughly speaking, after 5 years, you would walk away with about $25,000 more in cash if you had rented the home. But does that mean you should rent forever and that owning a home never makes sense? Not exactly, because renting comes with its own set of problems. And a more specific problem you might face on a daily basis is trying to find a place to prop up your phone while on the go or working from home. Now, most of the time I use my phone while I'm on calls at my desk, but in the past I've always had to prop it up on random things I have lying around. But with the help of today's sponsor, Torraz, that's not an issue anymore. With the new Torraz Q3 silicone phone case, I now have a built-in stand, which means I can stand my phone up anywhere I need to and then just fold the stand back in when I'm done. Torraz is the #1 brand for MagSafe stand cases, and the case is designed for users who love the original Apple silicone case feel, but want a more functional case for their daily life. And if you happen to drop it, there is no need to worry because the Q3 case is protected by a 100% air cushioning structure. If you're looking for a new phone case, I can't recommend the Q3 enough. Click the link in the description below for 20% off a Q3 silicone case of your own. And thank you again to Torres for sponsoring today's video. Now let's look back at the problem with renting a home. When you're renting a home, you don't get a say in what happens. If you want to paint the walls, maybe you can, maybe you can't. And at the end of your lease, if your landlord decides not to allow you to renew, you might have to move out. And moving costs can add up quickly over those 5 years. So best case scenario, your landlord is great and everything goes to plan. Worst case scenario, you move a time or two throughout those 5 years and you can't make any changes to the house, which all could eat into that $25,000 difference pretty quickly if you're moving every couple of years. And like we already covered, when you're renting, you're not building any equity. So in theory, your rental payments are just kind of being thrown into the wind every month without any real return coming back to you. But if you really think about it, owning a home is kind of the same thing. In both circumstances, you are paying a monthly fee to live in a space. Where that monthly fee goes depends on if you're renting or owning. But in both options, you are paying someone else to live somewhere. So it comes down to how much control and flexibility you want to have over your life. Because if you're looking at this from a purely financial point of view, it might not work out like you think or expect it to. You see, unlike what the real estate gurus would like you to believe, the housing market does not always go up, and even when it does, it might not end up the way you want it to. Everyone loves the stories of boomers who bought their homes in 1958 for $12,000 and now it's worth over $1 million. But it's not always as good as it sounds. Right off the bat, you might be thinking that Grandpa Steve just cashed in big time on his house. He held it for 67 years and walked away with $988,000 in cash. But that's where you would be wrong. Although that is the simplest way to look at it, mathematically, that's not how it works. First, we need to look at everyone's favorite financial term, inflation. If we adjust the $12,000 purchase price from $1958 to $2025, that $12,000 home actually costs about $133,281. So if Grandpa Steve sold it in 2025 for $1 million, he's actually looking at a small gain of about $865,000. And again, it doesn't stop there. Because this house didn't just sit empty and perfectly still for 67 years, it was lived in and used, which means there was maintenance and costs of living that have to be factored in. This includes replacing the roof a time or two, replacing the air conditioning, and making updates to the home over the years. Usually, maintenance costs will run you about 2% of the home's value per year. So we can roughly estimate that by taking the average value of the home over these 67 years and multiplying it by 2%, giving us a maintenance cost of $678,040. Beyond maintenance, you also have to look at the rising property tax rate, the cost of selling, and all the little additional costs of owning a home. And with all that said, based on our rough figures, Grandpa Steve is looking at $249,960 in profit on the home, which is not anywhere near the $988,000 we initially expected. But I'm not putting these numbers in front of you to say that owning a home is a terrible idea, because not everything in life needs to revolve around a profit figure or an investment return. Owning a home is a lifestyle choice you need to make for yourself. It is not a good investment because, as we see here, even if you hold your investment for over half a century, you still won't walk away with enough to retire on. And you would have been way better off with that $12,000 in the S&P 500, where it would have grown from $12,000 in 1958 to over $10.5 million in 2025, which is why it bothers me so much to see people talking about purchasing a home like it's a stock, hoping to get in while the value is low and ride it to the top. The decision to purchase a home should not be solely based on the investment returns you're hoping to see. Instead, you purchase a home for the stability of being in a desirable location that you can stay for many, many years and build wealth outside of your home. Your home value will most likely increase, but as we saw in our example, it usually only increases enough to keep up with inflation, which is fine as long as you're not looking at your home as an investment that needs to make 5% returns every year. But with all that said, when does it make sense to buy a home versus renting a home? Because it seems like in today's economy, there is no right move. You're either overpaying to buy a home that statistically you might not stay in for long enough to see a return, or you're renting and just throwing money away while you work on building up a larger savings account. If you haven't caught on by now, the decision on buying a home cannot be boiled down to a simple yes or no answer. It is incredibly dependent on your personal preferences, your stage of life, what your goals are, and the area you want to be in. That said, there are a few questions you can ask yourself, because the decision to buy a home is less dependent on the exact time you're in and more dependent on what you're looking for out of your life today, regardless of interest rates, home prices, or the state of the economy. If you're unsure of where you want to be physically located for the next 10 plus years, or you don't want to deal with unexpected repair costs, then renting might make the most sense. On the other hand, if you love the area you're in, you want more control over the space you live in, and you're not afraid to commit to a spot for 10 plus years, then it might be time to buy a home, as long as it financially makes sense. See, that's the key thing here. First, you need to assess your personal preferences and the stage you're in. Then you look at the financial side of things, not to decide on the investment potential, but to make sure you're not spending more than you have and trapping yourself in a situation that you'll regret in a few months or years. You see, buying a home is a long-term decision, and the only way to realize the long-term gains of home ownership is by holding it for a long time. So ask yourself these simple questions if you're on the fence. Do you plan to live in this house for 10 plus years? Is that monthly payment less than 25% of your gross income? Do you have 20% to spend on the down payment? Are you okay with the value of your home going down and not up? And finally, are you excited about this decision? You shouldn't feel like you're being forced into signing on the line because you can answer yes to questions 1 through 4. If you're not excited, do not do it. Simply rent and wait until you reach the stage where home ownership excites you. Like many things in life, it can and will be difficult to own a home at times. And if you're not even excited about it to begin with, you're going to hate it when things start going wrong. So save yourself the trouble now and just wait. Buying a home can be one of the largest financial decisions you make in your lifetime, so spend the time to really break it down and figure out if it's right for you. But most importantly, remember that a home is not a good investment. It is an asset that you are purchasing to change your lifestyle, not your path to retirement. If you like this video, YouTube thinks you might also like this one, so check it out.